of America, I'm Jon Favreau.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
Later in the pod, you'll hear Tommy's interview with Senator Elizabeth Warren, who stopped by our office on Tuesday to meet Leo and Pundit. We'll also talk about reports that Robert Mueller might be wrapping up his investigation, Trump's latest attacks on the media, and a frightening report that Clarence Thomas might retire so that Trump can pick his replacement, a move that one Democratic presidential candidate might have a solution for. Ugh. Bad news all around, Dan.
Not good. I got some questions. Where was Luca? More of
Luca was
like more of a Bernie guy, or what's the deal?
Luca sat in our office, and she didn't come out and play. I don't know why. It was sort of sad.
You know what? It's Tommy's Iowa caucus roots. She's not ready to commit yet. She wants to. Let's see all the candidates come through.
That is correct. Yes, Luca wants to. Luca's much more choosy. Also, check out this week's Keep It, that features an interview with Desus and Mero. Check out this week's Pod Save the World, that features an interview with Tommy and his former boss, former National Security Advisor Tom Donlin. That will sound very different than the Desus and Mero interview. And check out crooked.com/events to get tickets to our upcoming shows in Boston and New Hampshire in April. All right, let's start with the big news that broke on Wednesday. CNN, NBC, and The Washington Post are all reporting that newly confirmed CNN, NBC, and The Washington Post are all reporting that newly confirmed Attorney General William Barr and Justice Department officials are preparing for the end of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation and are expecting to receive a confidential report as early as next week. During his confirmation hearing, Barr did not make any commitments that Mueller's work will be made public. Dan, want to hear what you make of these reports. It struck some Mueller watchers as odd because there's still a lot of loose ends out there. There's open investigations into Roger Stone. Mueller's in a legal fight with some mystery foreign company. There's Jerome Corsi's aborted plea deal. He could be indicted still. We don't know what's going on with George Nader and his cooperation about Middle East influence on the elections. There's the Seychelles meeting with Eric Prince and the Russians. Adam Schiff just turned over a bunch of transcripts for witnesses they interviewed during the House investigation to see if there was perhaps perjury committed, because many people think there might be. A lot of loose ends. On the other hand, Mueller's office has already started handing off some investigations to other parts of the Justice Department. Some Mueller prosecutors have gone back to their old jobs. People were spotted moving files out of Mueller's office last week, which really could mean anything. Dan, what do you make of all this?
I have no idea. I've obviously became obsessed with this. I read everything Marcy Wheeler had to say. I read what Garrett Graff from Wired had to say. He's another very close Mueller watcher. And we just don't know, right? We don't know if this is a good sign, a bad sign, a sign for panic, a report that's, a media report that's off. It's not. I honestly just don't know what to think. But we probably have to emotionally and politically start preparing for the end game in the near future.
How does one emotionally prepare for the end game?
Lower your expectations, John. Lower your expectations.
What if
play out the arguments in your head when Mueller has a report that comes out that is does not draw specific conclusions, but lays out a pretty compelling case, and all the MAGA hat people don't immediately just change their avatar to William Weld. Don't be disappointed, right? Like Mitch McConnell doesn't schedule a Senate trial. We just have to be prepared that whatever Mueller finds, as it relates to Trump, right, is interesting, is very important for the historical record, but is highly unlikely to result in his removal from office from any reason other than the verdict of the voters in the fall of 2020.
Did we spend too much money on red string? Is that the conclusion? Well, look, so we don't know what's in the report, but some people, like our fearless editor-in-chief Brian Beutler, suspect that it's possible that maybe Trump may be involved in shutting this investigation down early since these reports came right after William Barr's confirmation. I know Brian's not sure of this, but he was at least floating this possibility yesterday. And I think actually now he probably doesn't think that's the case. But, what do you think of that this idea that we're hearing these reports that there may be the end of the investigation coming next week because somehow Trump is involved, Barr has just been confirmed, known idiot Matt Schlapp, whose wife is strategic communications director in the White House, tweeted after Barr was confirmed, oh, good, now we have, a real attorney general and Mueller will be gone soon, which was sort of crazy. What do you make of all that?
First, I would note that I'm pretty sure the use of the word strategic in Mercedes Schlapp's title is ironic. But it's very, we have been saying this for a long time, that we have been living in a slow motion Saturday Night Massacre, in reference to when Nixon fired everyone in the Justice Department in order to end the investigation into Watergate. That has been happening. We've been purging the top ranks of the FBI. Trump fired Jim Comey. We have been engaged. Trump has been tampering with witnesses out in the open. Pardons are being floated to people like Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort's cooperating with Bob Mueller and communicating with Trump's attorneys at the same time. Trump has done everything he possibly can to throw roadblocks and stop this obstruction, short of firing Bob Mueller, which has been the third political third rail here for him. And so, anything is possible, but what he's basically done is remove the people slowly who are supporting the investigation and replace them with loyalists who oppose the investigation. That includes Barr, and it includes getting Rod Rosenstein out of the Department of Justice. Not saying he's not firing Hot Rod, but Hot Rod is being replaced, and therefore someone else will be in charge of the investigation. And so you don't have to be some crazy, spooky Mulder conspiracy theorist to believe that ultimately Trump is pulling the strings here, whether he's actually sent a message to end it right now and Barr is doing that, or he's just forcing everyone's hand through his actions to date. Trump's fingerprints are all over this for sure.
I know that you and me and Tommy refer to him as Hot Rod sometimes. I think that's the first time it's actually come out on the pod. Hot Rod Rosenstein.
If your name is Rod, you're gonna have the nickname Hot Rod, like that. I don't think anyone in the history who's gone by Rod has not been referred to as Hot Rod, either literally, figuratively, ironically. So I don't think anyone should be shocked by that.
So yeah, you're right that Trump has been openly attempting to obstruct this investigation from the start. He tells us this. He famously told Lester Holt he did. Marcy Wheeler said yesterday that she does think that this is Mueller making the decision to end this investigation on his own timeline, and she thinks part of the reason it is Mueller's decision is because these reports are coming out. Yes, Barr has been confirmed, but he hasn't started yet, which means that Rosenstein still is in charge of the investigation, and Rosenstein has been allowing the investigation to continue uninterrupted for some time now. And also because there's many reports that Barr knows Mueller, is family friends with Mueller, and would not try to do this to him. Now that's Marcy's view of this. But look, I do think it does seem to make sense, right? That, if Barr it would be hard for Barr to have shut down the investigation already because Barr hasn't even gone through his ethics briefing. He hasn't really taken the job yet. He's just been confirmed. Rosenstein's still there. And also, Mueller can think to himself, well, I didn't want to end it while Whitaker was the acting attorney general because he's such a fucking goober and not really legitimate. So now at least I can say Rosenstein was overseeing the investigation, but Barr was in place, newly confirmed by the Senate. Now I feel good about the legitimacy of how to end this thing. So that's another theory.
Very, very compelling.
Yeah. So if the report does come out soon, the next fight is over whether we'll know what's in it. Barr said during his confirmation that he wants to be as, quote, transparent as possible with Congress and has made clear that the Justice Department generally guards against publicizing, quote, derogatory information about uncharged individuals. So,
unless that person is Hillary Clinton.
What's that?
said unless that person is Hillary Clinton.
Yeah, thanks, Comey. Appreciate that. No, so what, if anything, can Democrats do about this? Because you could see the situation where, and I think in the Washington Post, they said, people in the White House are not expecting any additional criminal indictments to touch anyone in the White House or Trump's allies or anything like that. But they are expecting things in the report to be politically damaging to Donald Trump. Now, what the fuck do they know? Because they're a bunch of White House goobers who don't really know much. But, it does seem like it would be very bad if there was a report that had a lot of damning information about Trump and his close associates, and yet because they weren't technically indictments, we never know about it.
Well, there's a very real question about the ability to subpoena that report.
Yeah.
When Marcy was on the pod last Thursday, she explained why she's not worried about the report. But yeah, this is going to be a real question if this is the end. If there's no more indictments at the end of the day, we have Michael Flynn for lying, Paul Manafort for tax evasion and lying, we have Roger Stone for lying, and we don't have actual crimes, which is reminiscent of how the Patrick Fitzgerald investigation into whether the Bush administration maliciously publicized, leaked classified information to smear Valerie Plame and Joe Wilson, which simply Scooter Libby going to jail for lying to the FBI or lying to investigators. I can't remember what the actual charge was, but it was a lying obstruction charge, not a charge of actually committing the crime. And that is a real possibility. It is very hard to prove something like a conspiracy here, even though there's the legal facts and then there's the political facts.
Yeah.
The political facts are everyone in Trump's campaign was meeting with Russians to talk about how to win the election, including sharing polling information, receiving opposition research, and then lying about it on multiple occasions, either to the FBI, to Congress, or on their legally required national security clearance forms, at the same time that Trump was doing business with Russia to strike a deal that would be his richest building deal yet, to build a tower in Moscow with a reported penthouse for Vladimir Putin.
And lying about all of it.
We all know.
And lying about all of it the entire time. Lying about it through the campaign. Lying about it through the transition. Lying about it in the early administration. And we know it continued during the transition with Mike Flynn calling the Russians, talking about sanctions relief after Obama placed sanctions on Russia for interfering in our elections. It's like, it is important to realize, like you said, if there are no more indictments, right? And MAGA media goes crazy, and it will absolutely spill into the mainstream media as well. We will get stories after stories that just say, Democrats in disarray now. Had they all been counting on these indictments? What if Trump was right? Does this mean he's going to win re-election now? It is going. My advice, if it comes to pass, just go take a walk, shut off your Twitter and your news for a long time because it's going to be unbearable. And one of the reasons it's going to be unbearable is because what we know, not just from news reports, but from federal prosecutors, is that Donald Trump and his team were willing to cheat to win the election. In the case of the hush money payments with Michael Cohen, we know that they did cheat to win the election, and federal prosecutors not only put Michael Cohen in jail for this, but they have implicated Donald Trump, the President of the United States, in a felony, in a campaign felony. So that's one case of cheating to win the election. This other case of trying to cheat to win the election is Donald Trump's son, his son-in-law, his campaign chairman, who's also going to jail, meeting with Russians, saying, please give us dirt on Hillary Clinton so we can win the election. We know that's all true. We know that he was lying about business deals. We know that Vladimir Putin knew that Donald Trump was lying about his business deals with Russia, which means that the president allowed himself to be compromised by a foreign leader of a government that tried to interfere in our elections. That's not great. We know that Donald Trump also was disloyal to the United States and would rather believe Vladimir Putin over his own intelligence agencies. And we know that because he stood up in front of the world in Helsinki and said that. There is plenty of wrongdoing around Russia that should tell us Donald Trump is unfit for this job. it's sort of all we need.
But even beyond that, if we lived in a world with a normal Republican Party that wasn't essentially a political protection racket for Donald Trump, you could indict Trump. Yeah, I'm sorry. Let me say that again. You could impeach Trump right now for multiple reasons without ever mentioning the word Russia.
Yeah.
You could do it on his business dealings. You could do it on the allegations we have. But you just do it on him being a terrible president who has made choices. Let me say this again. You could do it simply on corruption alone, from the fact that foreign governments are spending, and foreign governments and corporations spending absurd amounts of money in his schlocky hotel in order to influence the president and line his pocket, which is a violation of the Constitution, mind you. You could do it on the Stormy Daniels case. You could do it on multiple things, and you wouldn't need to mention Russia. But that's also a moot point because Trump is not being impeached.
Right.
This is not an argument that is going to be made to a jury of senators. Not an argument that's made to a jury of Trump's peers. It is an argument that's being made to the voters from now until November of 2020. And that we get to make that argument regardless of what Bob Mueller reports. And I've said this before, and this is important when you think about Russia, is that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence.
Right.
We know for a fact, as you pointed out, that Russia helped Trump win this election. We know that Trump's family and campaign staff sought and benefited from that help. We just can't prove, maybe we can't prove they all actively worked together, proof beyond a reasonable doubt of that fact, but we know it happened. And it is what it is. Everyone's going to freak out. Put your phone in a drawer, put something good on television, go for a walk your dog if you have them, play with your children. Don't freak out when the New York Times blares across its front page, Mueller, Trump innocent of all charges, as he will do as part of some sort of guilt eradication exercise over the fact that they're located in Manhattan.
Twitter's going to be so bad. Okay, or, by the way, there's another alternative here. There's actually many alternatives, but one is you are listening to this maybe Thursday afternoon when it comes out. Tomorrow is Friday. There could be more indictments on Friday. This could sound very quaint on Friday. The other thing we know that's coming out tomorrow, Friday, is Mueller will be submitting a sentencing memo for Paul Manafort, which is likely to have quite a bit of detail about how he conspired with a suspected Russian intelligence with a suspected Russian intelligence asset, Konstantin Kilimnik, something he has already pled guilty to. And we're going to find out more details about just what that was, what that conspiracy looked like, what it was when he shared the polling information, all kinds of information about that. We're about to find that out on Friday. And then, there could be other indictments or the report, by the way. There's sort of this assumption that maybe the report's going to be fine just because, William Barr and the Justice Department know about it. But, the report could also say that the president obstructed justice. The report could name him as an unindicted co-conspirator. We have no idea. We have no idea what might happen next week, and it may not even happen next week. It could be in the weeks to come. So there is a lot we don't know, and we should all hold off on making judgments until Bob Mueller speaks or his report speak.
My advice to everyone, as you can tell from the tone of our conversation today, is prepare for the worst, hope for the best. So that is what I'm doing.
Yeah. And Michael Cohen is testifying next Friday, February 28th.
On the day of the North Korea summit. Great job, Adam Schiff.
Well, Brian Beutler brought this up to me late last night when we were sort of connecting all of our red string on this together. Schiff tweeted last week or the week before, we are postponing Michael Cohen's testimony until Friday, February 28th because of the investigation, because of the Russian investigation. Because they've asked us to, basically. So that's pretty interesting. That why would Michael Cohen not be allowed to testify until Friday, February 28th? What's happening between now and then? And if it is the report, what does that mean for why he couldn't, or why he could only testify on Friday? Who knows? One more thing to think over. Okay, let's talk about two news stories from yesterday. The first is from the New York Times, and here's the lead. Even by his standards, President Trump's biting attacks on the press this week stand out. He has praised a libel lawsuit against the Washington Post, called for retribution, called for quote retribution against NBC for satirizing him on Saturday Night Live, and on Wednesday issued his sharpest words yet against the New York Times, calling the newspaper quote a true enemy of the people. That's first story. Now, second story from yesterday is about how, according to the FBI, a Coast Guard officer who was arrested with 15 guns and 1,000 rounds of ammunition was actually a white nationalist who was plotting to murder Democrats and media personalities on a, quote, scale rarely seen in this country. The government has labeled him a domestic terrorist. So there's absolutely no evidence that Trump's hateful rhetoric about Democrats and the media led directly to this person's actions. But as Tommy noted on Twitter yesterday, there was 100% chance that Trump was briefed on this domestic terrorist before he tweeted that the New York Times is the enemy of the people. So that seems beyond fucked up, no?
Yes, John, it does seem beyond fucked up, but not surprising.
I mean, you know, I have to say, like, after the Saturday Night Live tweets when everyone was sort of freaking out, and I know Alec Baldwin was freaking out, and they're like, Trump's targeting us and all that kind of stuff. There was part of me that is like, you know, is this a little overdone? The president's complaining about a sketch, you know, that he doesn't like, and that's just typical Trump. He's a whiny baby about shit. And maybe we shouldn't get, you know, and then something like this happens and it reminds you of how dangerous this is. And, you know, we're only a couple months out from in October when some MAGA asshole sent pipe bombs to Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and a whole bunch of our leaders, Democratic leaders. And
journalists.
And journalists at CNN. So, you know, this stuff is very, very scary. And all Donald Trump would have to do is not say crazy shit like this. He can complain about the media all he wants. He can complain about his coverage all he wants. Words matter when you're the president of the United States. And you tweet shit like the press is the enemy of the people. People are going to listen to you. And people who are unstable or unwell or white nationalists trolling around on the internet, they're going to eventually take cues from you. They're going to think it's okay because the president says that the president says what they think.
Yeah, that's exactly right. There, for all of the policy atrocities and the just international embarrassment it is to have this fucking clown as our president, there is a moral dimension to this, which is, even if a lot of us, 60% of the country, knows that Trump is a joke, there are people who the president is sitting in the Oval Office like all the normal presidents who came before him, and his words matter, and he sets a tone on issues for at least some portion of the population, and they're dangerous. I've had the same reaction you've had a lot of times, because even though only a small percentage of the country is on Twitter, every reporter's on Twitter. Whenever Trump attacks the press, it dominates everything. And I do think it's one of the few strategic things he does, which is he knows how to distract them. There's no better way to distract the press than to talk about the press, right? And sometimes it's just like, can the press have the same reaction when Trump targets immigrants or African Americans or, you know, other people of color in this country or women, right? Like, why is the greatest outrage set for empty threats about ending the White House briefing or libel laws, or which we'll talk about, or things like that? But we have reached a point where what the president is doing is deeply irresponsible and dangerous. And we are incredibly fortunate that no one got hurt back last fall. And something very dangerous is going to happen. And this is what happens to have a malicious, narcissistic, raving lunatic in the White House. And it's a huge problem. It is also interesting that there is a world in which where Trump's words now have more power with people like this individual who was arrested or the person who sent the pipe bombs, but less influence on the discussion. Like, no one institutionally, we don't take Trump seriously when he threatens legal action against SNL or NBC or, you know, says he's going to, you know, stop doing the X press thing or do press coverage. Like, he's like the boy who cried authoritarian on these issues, right? Like people don't take him seriously anymore. That says all. I kind of wonder what is more dangerous, that he constantly tries to he says he's going to bridge the freedom of press, or no one takes him seriously and he bridges the freedom of press. But beyond that aspect of it, the danger of his words was very evident yesterday.
Yeah. And look, he's got it's not just him, he's got a whole chorus of conservative media and, some of the crazier parts of the conservative media, like the Alex Joneses of the world and people like that who've been parroting this stuff and saying this stuff for years, and now they have someone who's the most powerful person on the planet parroting that stuff, which is very, very scary. Quick note, because we had a bunch to talk about and Elizabeth Warren's interview is long, I cut the libel thing.
Okay, great.
So we can just cut
I'm glad you did, though I now regret reading the Wikipedia page on NYT versus Sullivan. So if you at a later date want to talk about the actual malice standard, then I can do that.
Cool. So we can just cut that from. All right. One last story to scare the shit out of all of you. First, the good news. Ruth Bader Ginsburg returned to work at the Supreme Court this week. Very happy to see Ginsburg back. We love Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Everyone send her vitamins. So she's back. She's back at work. Now the bad news. Jeffrey Toobin wrote a piece in the New Yorker this week about the possibility that Clarence Thomas might resign from the court soon, leaving Donald Trump the opening to appoint a younger conservative justice to replace him. Toobin writes, will Thomas retire? Over the years, he has made little secret of the fact that he doesn't enjoy the job very much. With a conservative future of the court secure, why wouldn't he call it a day after 28 years? Now, Toobin goes on to say that Thomas's friends don't think he'll do that, but of course we don't know. Dan, how possible is this, and how absolutely fucked would we be?
As you know, I'm someone who tends to reside on the darker side of things periodically. And I often do. It is like I was talking about the Mueller report, like a form of emotional management, where I like to imagine the worst case scenario and then be pleasantly surprised when it doesn't occur. And nothing knocks me for a loop than when a worst case scenario emerges that I have not imagined yet. And it never even fucking occurred to me that Thomas could resign between now and a Democrat hopefully defeating Trump next year. And so now it's like, obviously that's going to fucking happen. Of course it is. Like, why wouldn't it? It is perfectly in line with how the Republicans think about the Supreme Court and using power and everything. And Thomas is a conservative activist, not a judicial activist, an actual conservative activist. His wife runs a very conspiracy-laden fringe right-wing group. She was meeting with Trump just recently. And so, of course, for someone who cares about conservative politics, right? Not conservative legal, but conservative politics. Why wouldn't you resign while Trump and Mitch McConnell could jam it through when you have no idea what's going to happen with the Senate or the White House in 2020? It is Trump is probably a slight favorite to be president just because incumbents tend to win. Sorry, people. And just because of the map, Republicans are a slight favorite to keep the Senate, but it is not much better than a coin flip. And so why wouldn't you do this? It would be very in line with how Thomas, Mitch McConnell, and the rest of the conservative world thinks about the role of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I feel like a moron for not thinking about this because me, the naive optimist, was thinking, if Ginsburg can hang on till we have a Democratic president, then we have a Democratic president who could potentially replace Ginsburg if she retires, and then the next person in line to retire would be Clarence Thomas. And then if somehow a Democratic president could replace Clarence Thomas, suddenly now we have a 5-4 liberal majority on the court again, and things are good. And so I was thinking, that's a scenario that could come to pass. Let's hope for that. If we it's another bonus of having a Democratic president in 2020. But then, of course, the alternative is Clarence Thomas also understands that scenario and thinks, fuck it, I'm letting Trump appoint my replacement. So how would Mitch McConnell handle this, given the Garland precedent, which is, you don't appoint a Supreme Court justice during a presidential election?
That's so funny. Why does Mitch McConnell do anything? Because he can. Right? If Clarence Thomas decided to If Clarence Thomas decided to retire, 6 days before the election, Mitch McConnell would jam that through before a Democrat took over. Of course he would. You think he honestly believes in the norm of allowing the American people to decide who the Supreme Court justice be? Fuck no. Mitch McConnell has the political power equivalent of fuck you money. He would just do it, and he would not give a shit what anyone said about it.
So that's going to be bad. But the good news is at least one Democratic presidential candidate may have a solution here. Earlier this week, South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg said in a town hall that, quote, "I don't think we should be laughing at the idea of adding more seats to the Supreme Court," saying, quote, "It's no more a departure from norms than what the Republicans did to get the judiciary to the place it is today." This idea has gotten more airtime in the last half year or so since Gorsuch took a seat that should have been Merrick Garland's. Now, so people know, nothing in the Constitution requires 9 justices on the court. The court originally had 6 seats, and then various presidents and Congresses added and took away seats throughout the first half of the 19th century, including in 1863 during the Civil War, when Lincoln and the Congress added a seat to protect the Union from legal challenges. To add a Supreme Court seat, you would need majorities in both houses and then the president to sign the law. Dan, we have talked about this once before on the Monday pod, but what do you think of this idea?
I think you and I talked about it once as well,
Did
and
we?
I came in opposed. And then I think you, if I remember correctly, you made a very compelling argument. You switched my position, but I can't remember what your argument was. I actually have.
Well, you're going to hear it again.
About this. So let me sort of lay out the way I think about it. One, Pete Buttigieg is exactly right in why he's raising this, which is Republicans give zero fucks about what is good for democracy. They only care about what's good about Republicans. And if we try to hang on to governing norms like they are like life rafts in the ocean, we're going to get swamped. Like we constantly, it's like
we'll have a lot of norms, but not a lot of America.
Yeah, right. And so like Republicans will destroy a norm, get exactly what they want, and then we feel like it's our job to restore the norm. But Republicans have already burned the bridge behind them, and so like we have to expand. We have to widen the aperture of how we think about political power as Democrats. Republicans think about political power for political power's sake. The point of having it is to have more. Democrats think of political power as something that you get, and then it is your job to immediately spend it without any concern about achieving more political power in order to pass policy. Now, Democrats that is the right way of thinking in the sense that it is good. Like, if you win elections, you get this huge House and Senate majority. You get this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to pass the Affordable Care Act. Even though it's going to cost you dearly at the polls, you do it. Republicans don't think that way. They think about how do we use our 60 Senate seats to get 65 Senate seats, or our 35-seat House majority to get a 50-seat House majority. And we do have to find a balance between the way we thought about power and the way Republicans thought about power. Something between naive optimism and McConnell-like nihilism, right? There's to be something in the middle where we regret. And so I really applaud Pete Buttigieg for thinking about this in the right way, because I think for too long, Democrats have essentially brought a spork to a gunfight. Like, we're just getting clobbered, and we think, and even if you hear Democratic candidates, even Bernie Sanders, the most aggressively progressive leader in the Democratic Party by many measures, wants to keep the Senate filibuster.
I know.
Which means
I was going to talk about
this
this next.
Legislation will pass, with the possible exception. You can maybe pass one thing on budget reconciliation.
Yeah.
And when you talk to senators, most of them think that all Republicans are operating in good faith, and if Harry Reid hadn't used the nuclear option, we'd still be living in a world where Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan hung out and drank whiskey, and if we just had more bipartisan lunches together, then we would pass infrastructure. And that's just fucking stupid. And you've got to wake up and realize the nature of the opponent here. And that is right. Now, the only reason I am concerned about this is I don't know how it plays itself out in the long run. But I certainly am not. The argument I don't buy is that it would besmirch the independent reputation of the Supreme Court. That is absurd. One, Brett Kavanaugh's in the Supreme Court. He's a partisan hack, accused of very serious things. Two, I was in Florida when a conservative 5-4 majority decided to hand the election and fuck over the planet for George W. Bush in 2000. So this is not about the courts, how the court would actually operate. I'm sorry, let me say that again. It's not about some sort of, destroying this independent, unvarnished American institution, the Supreme Court. It is as partisan as the other branches of government.
Yeah.
I just don't know, how's it going to work? Are we going to add one, and then they're going to add one, and we're going to add one, and then eventually it's going to be Supreme Court decisions will be 63-27? I just don't know how it works.
Well, no, so that is the good argument against doing this, is that we add seats, then they add seats next time they're in power. And then the Supreme Court, even though it has been a partisan political institution for some time, has been growing. It has been growing more partisan and political over time, especially with the addition of the most recent conservative justices, who you rightly point out are not just conservative justices; they are conservative activists. Thomas is like that. He wasn't even so recent an appointment. Gorsuch is clearly like that. Kavanaugh is clearly like that. We've seen that in the decisions so far. Maybe the only one who's a conservative justice who hasn't shown that he is purely a partisan hack is John Roberts so far in some instances. But so the idea would be, if we add justices, then the Republicans add justices, and suddenly the court is basically just a political tool of whichever party is in control of the White House, and it is not a third independent branch of government. We have actually seen this happen in various Eastern European countries, places like Hungary, where they just keep adding justices to the court, and the court is nothing but a political tool. So it is a concern. On the other hand, you can say, we just named some of the times in the early 19th century where they changed the number of seats between 6 and 9. There was another time where one person basically changed the makeup of the Supreme Court, and that was between February of 2016 until April of 2017. There were only 8 justices on the Supreme Court for a full year and 2 months. And do you know who was responsible for that? Not a law passed by Congress and signed by a president. One person was responsible for that, and his name is Mitch McConnell. Mitch McConnell changed the makeup of the court from 9 justices to 8 justices for a year so he could wait for a Republican president and install a conservative activist on the Supreme Court. That's what Mitch McConnell did. And so I think as Democrats have to figure out, how do we rectify that extreme violation of a norm? And one way to do it is to say, there's different plans out there to do this. Someone I saw in the Washington Post, this has been floating around, a plan where Democrats add 2 justices to the court to make up for the Garland seat, to rebalance the court, and you name those 2 justices for 18-year terms, and then after 18 years, those 2 justices serve for life on the federal bench, on a lower federal bench. So then the court goes back to 9. And basically, you would add the justices and say, we are only doing this not because we just want to make the court a partisan political tool, but because we are rectifying a serious violation of the court's independence when Mitch McConnell decided that he would change the whole makeup of the court on his own in order to install a conservative activist. And then, you basically do it in the name of institutionalism. So that's one way to do it.
That's interesting. The lifetime appointment is in the Constitution, right?
Yeah, they said these are legal. These are 2 Yale professors who came up with this, and they said it's technically in the Constitution that the justices have to serve in the judiciary for life, which is why you could do term limits, but then send them back to the federal judiciary. That's what some law professors think, and various legal scholars as well.
Huh. I wonder can you retroactively do it?
That I don't know. That's
an interesting idea, because it is actually, there should be term limits for federal judges.
Yeah, I mean,
we can't live in a world where we have a half century of fucking conservative rule because 80,000 people in 3 states decided to tip the Electoral College against the popular vote. That's a fucking crazy way to run a country.
Well,
it really is. I was reading, I think it was one of the many articles I read about this yesterday talked about how basically the argument for court packing is that it's just stupid that Supreme Court officers are basically like lottery tickets for presidents, right? They either happen when you're president or not. And if they happen to happen when you're president, you get to shape the ideological direction of the country for a half century. It's a crazy way to run a government. So,
and look, I mean, there are plenty of reasons to worry about this kind of proposal, but here are the facts. If Donald Trump does replace Clarence Thomas with a justice who is a similar age to Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh, who are, Gorsuch I think is 51, Kavanaugh, is he like 49, 50? He's around the same age. And then John Roberts is 65, and I think Alito is like 68. That is the 5-4 majority on the court. 5 conservative justices, all in their 50s and 60s. That is a couple decades of a very conservative, very right-wing court overturning all kinds of legislation from even the most Democratic Congress and Democratic president. And if you're a liberal in this country, even if you're an independent, even if you're moderate, you have to look at that and think, is that what I want for the next couple decades, knowing how right-wing those justices are? And if it's not what I want for the next couple decades, when we are facing climate change, when we are facing massive inequality, when we are facing people with high health care costs who can't get by, if that's not what you want, what are we going to do about it? And there are remedies that are entirely legal here, that are in the Constitution. You can add justices. You can pass the law. It is not unconstitutional. And so I think it is. I'm glad that Mayor Pete brought that up. And look, and to go back to your point about the filibuster, like, have you been surprised how the different candidates have split on all these questions of court reform, congressional reform, basically ways to, instill more democracy into our democratic system, as I would call it? Basically, you just have Mayor Pete and Elizabeth Warren, who told Tommy in the interview that all options are on the table with the filibuster. She might get rid of the filibuster. You have both of them talking about potentially getting rid of the filibuster. And so far, not many of the other candidates. Gillibrand was sort of said she'd think about it when I interviewed her. Biden clearly loves it. Bernie said he likes it. Kamala Harris's campaign said she is not for getting rid of it at this time. And so I'm wondering why. I guess it's because they're all senators, although good for Elizabeth Warren for breaking out of the pact there. Oh, Cory Booker has said he likes the filibuster and would actively defend it. What's going on with these folks?
I don't have a clue. The filibuster is stupid. And it is a problem in the short term for Democrats, and it is a gigantic problem in the long term, as long as we can continue to exist in a world where California and Wyoming have the same power, and New York and Idaho have the same power, and young people who tend to be Democrats are moving to places like California and New York and these other blue states, and populations are decreasing in these other states. The power that progressives have in this country is going to diminish dramatically over time if demographic and population trends continue. So we are not going to pass progressive legislation. You're going to get one shot for presidency. You're going to get to do your Affordable Care Act. You're going to do something on you're going to pass something on budget reconciliation, which takes 50 votes, and that is it. We're going to pick one thing. We're going to get one Democratic president in 2021. We're going to do Medicare for all. Then we're going to be shut out until we get another new Democratic president. We're going to get one shot, and we're going to pass some part of the Green New Deal. And that is it. And you limit yourself if your way of doing this is budget reconciliation, because there are really complicated rules about the kind of things you can do. It has to be budget related. It's harder to do a lot of things that we care about. And so we are tying both hands behind our back. I think it's crazy. I think senators spend too much time with each other. The most generous possible view of this is that all the senators had a meeting. Elizabeth Warren couldn't make it. And they decided that their plan was, we're not going to say we're going to get rid of the filibuster until we get elected. And then we're going to get rid of that fucking thing, and we are going to pass everything.
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's the only thing I can think of that makes sense, other than deeply naive institutionalism for a broken institution.
Look, I've also seen, plenty of good liberals say the problem with getting rid of the filibuster is, can you imagine what Donald Trump would have done and Mitch McConnell would have done by now if there were no filibuster? Because there is still a filibuster right now. And my response to that is they tried to rip up the Affordable Care Act through reconciliation. They passed an absurd tax cut that was geared towards the wealthy through reconciliation. they've eliminated the filibuster for the Supreme Court. So, like, I guess they could have done more damage, but also all the stuff we just said remains true about progressive priorities. And like I said, I really have a concern about Democratic candidates going out there and talking to voters about how when they become president, they're going to pass Medicare for all and they're going to pass a Green New Deal. If they're not willing to think through how they're actually going to get those plans passed, because if a filibuster is in place, if they want to pass the Green New Deal and Medicare for all, but they also want to keep the filibuster in place, they're not being honest with the voters. That they're just that it's not going to happen. And then what's going to happen is we're going to elect a Democratic president. Trump's going to be gone. Everyone's going to be cheering. And then, President Kamala Harris or Cory Booker or whoever is in, or Joe Biden or whoever's in there is going to say, oh, yeah, remember on the campaign trail when I talked about Medicare for all and the Green New Deal? Actually, I can't get that done because, we need 60 votes and we don't have 60 votes. So sorry, everyone. And that's going to make people more cynical for next time. And they're going to make more cynical about government and participating. That's what's going to happen. So it really does bother me. And again, I would rather you say, I'm not for Medicare for all. I'm for, lowering the age where you can participate in Medicare to 55. And I actually think I can get some Republican senators for that. I think that's probably a stretch also. But at least be realistic about both your plans and your plan to get them done.
That's right. The other part that bothers me about it is in the Democratic Party right now, all the good things are happening at the grassroots level, right? It is, new groups like Swing Left or Run for Something. It is the people running for office, from school board to state legislature, et cetera, that is really exciting. Like really, it's the new members of Congress who got elected who aren't from the political establishment, right? It's a new party that's more diverse in gender and ethnicity and background and ideology. And that is all right at the top of the party. I really worry that we just have our blinders on about what we're facing. And if you don't understand the ways in which Republicans have been strategically stacking the deck against a growing progressive majority in this country, then you're going to be unable to succeed because they are going to throw everything at you. The Republicans, while the economy was going off a cliff, decided they would rather fuck over Barack Obama than save the economy. So this is the cynical, hackish group we are dealing with. If we don't approach that, if we don't rethink how we approach Republicans and how we think about political power, we are not going to achieve our fraction of things we need to do. And this isn't this is an opportunity cost. This is life and death for things like Medicare for all, and it is the fucking planet. It is melting underneath us, and we're worrying about norms and institutions and filibusters and having rose-colored glasses for some period of the Senate that didn't exist when the filibuster could do such important things like, I don't know, stop the Voting Rights Act for a while. Like what?
But you know what? Like this doesn't even. It doesn't even.
It alarms me about what's happening. I really want. Like this is not. I don't want everyone putting on the war paint trying to do McConnell light, but we have to think seriously and aggressively about how we handle this. And I really think there is Washington, D.C. bubble naivete going on.
Look, I mean, the point you just made, we don't have to be like Mitch McConnell. Stop it. The point you just made, how, we shouldn't be Mitch McConnell light. Like, we Democrats do not have to frame this as we have to play dirty like they play dirty. This is about this is about minority rule. Republicans are trying to rule and have power with only a minority of voters electing them. We might have a situation where a vast majority of the American people elect a president and elect a Congress who has promised them to expand healthcare access, who has promised them to combat climate change, who's promised all these things. And the reason that that progressive majority made up of Democrats, independents, non-voters, maybe some disaffected Republicans, the reason that majority won't get those policies is because Republicans have tried to put in all these rules in place to govern by minority rule. And all we are saying is that the voices of the majority of people in this country should carry the day. It is a set of democratic reforms. It is not playing in the mud like Mitch McConnell is playing in the mud. It is merely saying we want more democracy in our democracy. I think that's the way to frame it.
Yeah, and we want everyone to vote. And we want everyone to have a
Right.
chance to vote. We want everyone's voice heard in Congress. We want people's voices not drowned out by billionaires. And if that leads to more progressive policies, great.
Right.
But once those obstacles have taken out, it is incumbent upon both parties to make an argument for their vision for the country.
Totally.
We are willing to do that. Republicans know they will lose if they will do that, so they're rigging the game.
Yep. If you believe you can assemble a majority in this country for your policies, go for it. And if you get that majority, you get to put those policies in place. You won the argument. But if we win the argument, we get to put those policies in place. That's a fucking democracy. And I know that we have a republic and a representative democracy and all these other things, but Republicans have put far too many rules in place and abused the system in far too many ways and violated far too many norms so that now we have rule by minority. We do not have rule by majority in this country. And I think that's what Democratic candidates need to start talking about. Okay.
Heads Republicans win, tails Democrats lose is the way these are
Right.
going.
Okay. When we return, one Democrat who has certainly figured this out, Tommy will be talking to Senator Elizabeth Warren. Not the 28th.
Yes.
Okay.
So Michael Cohen.
How did I say it?
We could do it off playback if Kyle saved it already. This is Kyle. Let me get the timestamp for you. 1920-ish, 19 minutes-ish.
Thought Dan was back on the phone. It's right after that. Okay, ready? I think I said it one more time when I talked about the shift tweet too.
Yeah, Andrew can clean it up.
Yeah, okay.
If you get it right on the first
Okay.
one, we can clean up the later ones. Okay.
Oh, and Michael Cohen is testifying Wednesday, February 27th.